All right, welcome back to another special edition of the Mo News podcast. So many of you reached out last year after we did a tour of Procter & Gamble headquarters in Cincinnati. Procter & Gamble being the mega large American company that has brands like Tide and Downy and Gain and Dawn and Pampers and Cascade, many of the brands that we're all very familiar with. We did a tour there of the archives. This is a company that goes back about 200 years and spoke to the Procter & Gamble company historian and corporate storyteller. Yes, that is a title over there. His name is Shane Meeker. I got to speak to him briefly last year on our tour, but we invited him back this year because it is a fascinating history of a brand as well as this country and technology and the things that we do on a daily basis: wash dishes, do laundry, all the various things that Procter & Gamble creates products for. So we've brought him back to this podcast to talk about the history of the company, as well as laundry care, the creation of detergent, a lot of the things that we take for granted today, but many of us don't know the history of. I think you'll find this conversation with Shane to be fascinating, especially if you're a history nerd like me. It's also fascinating from a business perspective, the entrepreneurship that some of the folks at Procter & Gamble through history displayed as they created things like detergent, which was actually one guy's project for 14 years. So you'll hear that story. You'll hear about a variety of other things, including the fact that Procter & Gamble created the soap opera, like literally the soap opera, hence soap. We should note that this is sponsored by Downy and Tide, but ultimately you're going to come away here with a lot of really interesting information and history. So with that, let's get started on my conversation with Shane Meeker. All right, it is great to welcome Procter & Gamble company historian and corporate storyteller Shane Meeker to the podcast. Hey, Shane.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Shane, we record this actually almost to the day, 1 year to the day, since your folks invited me over to Cincinnati. The first stop was the archive and museum at Procter & Gamble HQ, taking folks through the nearly 2 centuries of history. I have to say, as a history nerd, I found it riveting, fascinating. And those of you in the audience who might have seen that on Instagram last year, we got some incredible feedback. You know, these are products that people shop for on a regular basis, are part of their lives, but they know very little about how they came to be.
There's a lot of memories for sure in the museum. And I would tell you, a lot of people visit and they see things from their childhood as much as they do from present day as well.
Yeah, I still think I smell the Vicks Vapor Rub from 1906 or something that you still holds its smell after 120 years. Before we get started on the history of the company, it's fascinating to me that Procter & Gamble has a historian and corporate storyteller. Pretty unique role. I'm curious how you got to that role and why P&G even has a role like that.
Sure. There's an old saying from actually a previous chief technology officer back in the 50s. His name was J.G. Pleasance, and he said, no company can afford the luxury of rediscovering its own prior knowledge. And being around for 187 years, we have a lot of prior knowledge, a lot of learnings, a lot of insights going through the projects, different, strategies, different executions, successes, failures, all those things that you can learn from. And the company tremendously values those insights. And starting back actually in the 1950s, they had started to put together an archives and collect that content. And there's been, honestly, a historian of sorts ever since that time period, putting those together. And even though we get a lot of external guests, like when we had you guys there a year ago, quite frankly, the majority of people that visit are employees who are doing research because they're working on projects today. They're looking at stuff into the future, but they want to learn from the past and see what we've looked at, what we've tried. Is there anything similar? What some of the other brands are doing or have done that could be inspiring? So it's a research center for employees. I've had it for 13 years. Prior to that, I've been with P&G though for 28. Prior to that, I was in our design function. I'm an industrial designer by background. So I was the person that would sketch out what our Tide bottles would look like and stuff like that, work on the design strategy of our brands. And absolutely love that, but always had a passion for history. And when that particular position opened up, they asked if I would like to move over to it, and I've been there ever since.
What's been the I mean, this is probably a hard question. Is there something, the most memorable thing you've discovered, the most surprising thing you discovered in this role?
So it's a great question. Honestly, even though I was working on the brands and I knew some basics of the stories, I didn't know all the origin stories of all the brands that we had. And that was one of the most eye-opening things when I became the historian, was just learning that every one of our brands has a very unique starting story of how it got, how it began, or the scientists behind it, or the insight that led to it, or the consumer testing that inspired it. Every single one of them. I mean, there was always some, really fun tidbits. Learning how Tide came about, the David Byerly story, which I know that you remember, and will be one of the things that I'm sure that we'll talk about later. I had never heard that story, even though I had worked on Tide, and that really gave me a ton of inspiration around the brand when I found out how much perseverance and tenacity was behind developing heavy duty synthetic detergents.
Yeah, well, actually, let's go there since you brought up David
Okay.
Byerly.
All right.
His the 14-year effort to develop
14
detergent.
years.
It's fascinating when you go through corporate history. Some innovations came by accident, right? Like the microwave oven, Teflon, and some came despite the goals of the company, or even against the wishes of the company. And so, talk to us about David Byerly here in the
Right.
1930s. What was the problem he was trying to solve for, and how did he go about it?
Right. So soaps, which were one of our core products, especially from 1837, quite frankly, all the way until the, call it, 1920s and into the 30s, were the way people did laundry. It's how they clean their clothes, whether it was bar soaps or chipped up soaps or powdered soaps, things like that. They use soaps. Soaps, though, have a couple inherent problems. One is soaps do not suds well in hard water. And the second is soaps leave behind something called soap scum, which in those days it could collect inside fabrics. It makes them kind of stiff and itchy. It would still clean them. It's just there was other effects of using soap, but that's all there was. But we knew that there would be a better way to do that. There had to be. So we put a group onto it, and it was being led by a scientist named David Byerly. And David worked on it for 7 years, trying to figure out an alternative to using soaps and laundry. And he wanted to create what would later be called a synthetic detergent, or a heavy duty synthetic detergent specifically. And worked on it for 7 years, had all failure for 7 years. So, not a lot of ups and downs. It was pretty much every experiment he tried.
I can't even imagine that. You're in work, you go into work every day for 7 years.
Another failure, yes.
And then we had another failure today.
Yes, yeah. Another experiment didn't work. But he definitely, in a lot of the writings I've seen about him, he didn't see it as, a failure as much as another direction that got him closer to where it when it would. Now, I will tell you that after 7 years, though, senior leadership looked at the project and said, well, he gave it a really good go, but we have some other projects we needed him to focus on. So stop the project. And they told David's manager to let him know.
This detergent thing is not going to work out.
It's just not going to work out. Yeah, we gave it a good try, though. So his manager goes and tells him, hey, they've canceled the project. And he immediately went to his manager and said, listen, you got to give me more time. I know it's been a long time, but I'm telling you, I can crack this. I just need more time. And his manager said, I'll tell you what, as long as you're getting your other work done too, any free time you have, you can still work on this, but you cannot write about it in any of your reports. So even going back that far, and it still happens today at P&G, our scientists write what are called smart learning reports, which are basically updates on all their experiments. And anyone in R&D can see anyone else's smart learning report. It's a way to share insights and learnings, basically. So his manager knew that if he wrote about it in his report, eventually leadership would see that he was still working on it. So he said, I won't write about it, promise. So he started working on it. At year 9, he still had all failure. At year 11, he finally had a discovery, although the product still didn't work, but it was the first thing that actually worked since he had been working on it. And he was so excited. He said, I got to tell somebody. So he typed it up into his report. even though he was not supposed to do that. And as his manager feared, it did make its way to the vice president of his division at that time, who then called in his manager and his manager's manager into his office and asked the question, how in the world is this guy still working on a project that we canceled 4 years ago? There is other projects that we need people focused on. Stop it now. And they famously left there, and on the way back to talk to David, decided that they would still continue to let him work on it, and told him, hey, thanks a lot for the report. Wish you wouldn't have done that. We just got in a lot of trouble, but we have decided to continue to let you work this project. But please, for goodness sakes, no more reports. And David, I'm sorry. Yes, I won't do that. Thank you very much, though. And at year 14 is when he had the first working prototype of what eventually would become Tide, the world's first heavy-duty synthetic detergent, the Wash Day Miracle. So 14 years, half of it in secret. So it's a great story of not only perseverance and tenacity from his end, but also of really supporting and helping your employees from his manager's end as well. So great pair.
Though I think you told me that, I don't know if it was his bosses or somebody had described him as a tenacious pain in the ass.
He was definitely seen as a very tenacious and determined and headstrong employee. Yes. Which, quite honestly, in the innovation role is exactly what you would want, right? I mean, you would want someone who does not get discouraged with, failed experiments and stuff, or especially if they're trying to get into a completely new kind of innovation space that, the company has not been in at that particular moment.
So Byerly works on this 14 years, finally gets success. You call it the Wash Day Miracle. Wash Day? Shane, why?
Yeah. It was called the Wash Day Miracle because back prior to Tide, essentially it would take consumers the whole day to do a load of wash. There was a lot of manual labor involved in the washing process. It was quite a chore. And so Tide launches in 1946 as the Wash Day Miracle, and it was called that by consumers as well, because now all of a sudden it gave several hours sometimes of their day back. There was another incredibly important invention that really became very accessible after World War II, around the same time that Tide launched, which was the automatic washing machine, too. So those two things combined, basically a very powerful hardware and software together, that really, really changed consumers' lives. And there had been washing machines available even going back into the 30s. But they were incredibly expensive, only used by the very wealthy. After World War II, with the baby boom, with the kind of development of suburbia and stuff like that, with also costs going down in appliances and things like that, washing machines kind of became the normal appliance that we see today.
Prior to that, though, I mean, we're using a bar of soap and a washboard and just scrub each piece of clothing. As you mentioned, a lot.
Which is why it took the whole day. Yeah, which is why it took the whole day. Yeah,
it was a whole day project. But I want to go farther back here to the origins, because I mean, you joined me from Ohio. We went to headquarters in Cincinnati, Ohio.
Yes.
How is it that this massive company, Procter and Gamble, gets started there?
Sure.
You talk about the brothers-in-law, William Procter and James Gamble.
That's right. Yeah, it's actually a fantastic story, because what you've got is a candle maker, William Procter from England, and a soap maker, James Gamble from Ireland, who come over to the United States, for a fresh start. And this is back, in the early 1800s, and looking for the right city to start up in. And they decide upon Cincinnati, Ohio. And it was honestly for kind of two big key reasons. The first was the Ohio River, which ran right through, of course, Cincinnati. And the Ohio River was a huge transportation and distribution artery in the United States at that time period, because this is before trains. So there's no rails yet. So basically it's roads and waterways are how people move. And honestly, the roads, very undeveloped, treacherous, things like that. So a lot of stuff is moved via rivers, and it's a big one. But there's a lot of cities on the river. So why Cincinnati specifically? And that leads to the second reason, which is a very, very important one, probably the most important, which was the German heritage of Cincinnati. Cincinnati was a German settled city, and it has the second biggest Oktoberfest in the world, only behind Munich itself, actually. because of that heritage. And there was a couple main exports out of the city because of that in that time period. One was beer, which we still make a lot of in Cincinnati. And the second was pork. And in fact, there was so much pork butchered in Cincinnati, Ohio, the nickname for the city was Porkopolis. And we even have a marathon every year to pay homage to that. It's called the Flying Pig Marathon to pay homage to that pork history. But the pork industry just wanted the meat. When they would butcher, the hogs, they just wanted the meat. What's left over is pig fats and oils. Coincidentally, the main ingredient you need to make soap and candles in that time period is pig fats and oils. So soap maker, candle maker, like what a great city. It's right on the river for easy distribution. And I've got easy access to pig fats and oils. So they set up their shops and then they end up marrying sisters. And it was their father-in-law who noticed that the two of them were driving the pig fat prices up on each other. So he's like, my two sons-in-laws are basically competing. That's no good. They should be in the same business. So he basically talked them into joining forces, and then soap and candles join up. And in 1837, Procter Gamble is formed.
So you got the soap maker, the candle maker, but the candle business has an issue with the whole electricity thing, right?
Yeah, electricity. Boy, yeah, consumers love that. They did, yes. Yeah, so the right around the turn of the century, although gas lighting kind of was the beginning of the end of that, but really in the turn of the century when electricity really started taking off. That definitely, yes, people are like, oh, wow, this electricity thing, wonderful, much more convenient. So, yeah, candle business starts dropping dramatically. We actually made our last candles in 1920. Fun fact, though, we would start making candles again in 2007, but under a very different name, which would be Febreze. And they would be Febreze candles, which we still do.
So you're
today.
Back in the candle business after
Back in the candle business, but those candles are for a very different purpose than what the candles were back prior to that, which was lighting your house. That is when we really kind of shifted our focus to our second expertise, which was then soaps. And Ivory becomes kind of the first real big famous brand of soap that we really demonstrate that in 1879 with its launch.
So you got Ivory. I'm using my Ivory to clean my clothes, thanks to David Byerly and his decade and a half of work. We get to the detergent. By the way, speaking of detergent, that first one, Tide.
Yes.
And I'm curious, as you've looked back at the history here, how do they come up with the names for this stuff? Where does the Tide name come about? And where, how do they, I mean, we again take them for granted as we walk down the aisles of a Target or a Walmart, but like Tide.
Yeah. So sometimes names, they just make sense. Like Swiffer. Swiffer was based off of the swift cleaning that it could do. So, it kind of did have, a link to it. Downy was actually, the name was based off the soft feel of down. And then sometimes it's just more of there's a story behind the name, Tide being one of those. So now we technically don't know this for sure, but the legend is, and we've heard this legend repeated enough in documents that we believe it to be true.
Most of history is like this, Shane, right?
That can be true.
We're like, we don't know for sure, but this is the story that we like.
This is the story. This is the story. That's right. And so while the formula was being done and while David was working on it, and they were trying to think of a name for this incredible new technology, one of the senior leaders was actually on a vacation, and he was sitting on the beach, and he noticed how clean the beach is when the tide rolls in and then it rolls out. And we've all seen that. You know what I'm talking about. When that tide rolls out, it leaves this perfectly smooth, clean beach line there. And so supposedly that is then why they decided to name it Tide. Plus, in all honesty, too, you always wanted kind of a short name, too. You didn't want something really long because it's got to fit on the package, too. And you want it to be simple and easy to remember. But that is the story, supposedly, of why it was called that. Now, Ivory, the name came from actually a Psalms verse that Harley Procter, the son of the founder, had heard while in a church service. And he liked that and decided to call, because the bar of soap was kind of an ivory color, he thought that actually made perfect sense and called it that. So there's lots of different ways these names can come about. Again, sometimes it's a reflection of the benefit. Sometimes it's, part of a story around the insight behind it. Sometimes it's just something inspiring that caught somebody's eye.
So on the detergent, timeline we're on here, the first Tide, is that liquid or is that powder?
It's powders, yes.
It's powder.
So powders were primarily used all the way up until the 80s. So Tide launched Liquid Tide in 1984, and then Tide Pods launched in 2012. And then we have Tide Evo, which now launched in 2024. So different product forms, all based upon changing consumer needs and making sure. And we always keep those forms out, though, so that people can still, some people prefer to use liquids, and there's still liquids available, of course. If people want to use pods, they can use pods, So those forms usually stick around, too, because consumers develop preferences for them.
Yeah, that's one of the questions I want to get to here is, in your history, to what extent, and I imagine the answer is all of the above, how much is innovation driven by consumer requests and habits in the marketplace? How much of it is driven by just your folks working in the lab saying, maybe they'd like this, the whole Steve Jobs thing. They don't know they want the iPhone until I give them the iPhone, and then they realize they want the iPhone. What's the philosophy there, or has it sort of been an all of the above at Procter Gamble?
So it's really always led by insight, honestly. And even to the Steve Jobs thing, though, you're right. He did always have a great quote about that. But the insight of people, for example, wanting to take their music with them and not have to carry a suitcase of cassettes, or I wish it was more portable and I didn't have to have a CD album. The insight still led to that device. They may
There's
not have
still
said,
a
I want
problem
an
you're trying to
MP3 player.
solve.
Right,
Yeah.
yes. And the problem always inspired by your audience and your consumers. So we always start, and on every invention, I will tell you, at P&G has always started with what's called shop-alongs or in-home testing, which is when we are actually at the consumer's house watching them do the chores or they're doing the task. And a lot of it is much observation as it is conversation. I mean, if you want to know how people like to shop, the best way to do that is to go shopping with them. And so we go shopping with our consumers at the stores that they shop
So that's
at.
something you're still doing at the company?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah, no, a passion for unique insights is what drives our innovation. And quite honestly, it was said best, although all of our leaders have always said it in one form or another. A.G. Lafley, who was a previous CEO, had a great way of putting it, which was consumer is boss. So everything starts with that. We fall in love with the problem before we ever worry about the solution. And then once they're in the lab, you're right. They come up with stuff. Technologies are invented, but those happen because they're working against a particular problem.
So going back to detergent here, like how does the idea for, powder, we've been doing that for a while. Have we thought about a liquid or thought about a pod? How do those come about? Yeah.
Pre-treating, yeah. And also different chemistries. So a lot of consumers, if they would have a stain, they wanted to be able to put a little bit on it and kind of scrub the stain before they could put it in. Liquids allowed for that powders could not, for example. The great thing about pods is it's got different chambers on. So we can put different chemistries on there that normally could not be necessarily in a bottle together. But because they're separated by chambers, they are. And then when that's in the wash, those different chambers dissolve at different times to let out those chemistries. Tide Evo, which is our new functional fibers technology, is basically liquid layers that have been turned into a dry fiber, and they're stacked on top of each other. So we can put, I think the current one has like 6 different liquid technologies stacked on top of each other. But because they're dry, they won't interact until they're actually in the water inside the washing machine. So all of it driven by technology needs, which change with fabrics, which change with the consumer habits, which change with appliance needs, there's all kinds of things that influence, why we have to come up with new technologies in the laundry place.
So sticking with laundry, so we got Tide in the 1940s.
Yep.
We're now in the 60s. You have a successful detergent in the marketplace. What problem are you trying to solve with the innovation of Gain detergent?
Yeah, so Gain's a fantastic story. It's one of my favorites, actually, because we launched Gain in the 60s as another cleaning focused detergent. And it doesn't do well because Tide has already been out for 20 years at that point and is the best of the best. So it struggles. And it wouldn't be until the late 70s that Gain was doing some research and they heard some consumers basically say, sometimes your nose just knows when it's clean. And at that point, we knew scent and perfume was important in the laundry process. I mean, people want their clothes to smell good. But really, up to that point, Tide had never really talked about that. They talked more about clean and stain removal and, that kind of side, the visual clean. So all of a sudden we realized that the scent is actually a really critical part to a lot of consumers. And the more research we do, we realize that there's a large portion of consumers that would call themselves scent seekers. They actually want a lot of scent in their laundry, and they need a brand for that. And that is then when Gain kind of really shifts its focus from not necessarily a visual clean like Tide would focus on, but more of a sensorial clean. It still, of course, takes out stains. It still absolutely does that, and it has to perform very well on the cleaning vector, but it focuses most of its story on the scent side of things. And it had a great campaign, which was sometimes you can see better with your nose than with your eyes, which it launched in the 80s. And that was the beginning of creating the Gain that we know today, which really goes after that scent enthusiast.
Yeah, that was part of my tour. You took me, you guys have a claim to fame there, right? Are you the largest perfumer in
We're
America,
definitely, we're for sure one of the. I honestly can't say that we are the number one, but I know we are one of the largest perfume developers in the country. Yes,
right, which is not something we think about. But then you're like, okay, you have shampoos. You
got
like
shampoos,
Olay, deodorant, right?
Febreze, Bounce, Downy, Tide, Gain. Yes. Oh gosh, Dawn. Yeah.
And of course, super important as a consumer, like some of them have very unique scents, and eyes closed, exactly what you're sniffing there.
Yeah.
One of those I know is Downy. And so as you've developed over time, our toolkit for laundry, fabric softener.
Yeah.
What's the origin there?
Yeah, so fabric softener. So Downy launches in 1960, and it launches against a very powerful consumer insight, which is as detergents got better and better, they were cleaning the clothes much deeper. They were. And so with that, more powerful cleaning, it sometimes would take some of the natural oils out of the fabrics and would make them a little stiffer. So, hence the need for fabric softeners to then put some of that softness back into it, and also give it that another boost of scent as well to go with it. A very similar insight at that same time period was going on with, of course, shampoo and conditioners too, because as shampoos also got more and more powerful and were cleaning hair better, shampoos take oil out. Hair conditioners put oil back in, essentially. And done for a very similar reason, and all that's kind of going on at that same time. But Downy launches in 1960, and its very famous April Fresh scent launches in 1966, which a lot of people know, and it always had a really powerful signature visual at the end of ads where it would show this stack of towels, and the Downy bottle would drop onto the stack of towels and show how fluffy and soft that it made those.
One thing that you took me through is the cross pollination between brands.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned at the top, it's something that various folks from the various divisions will go to the museum, being like, "What's this brand working on?" And
right,
inspire new ideas here. Was P&G wasn't in the hair care business until after Downy, right? Like, how does what you were doing in laundry lead to insights and innovation when it came to
in those other categories?
Yeah.
It's a fascinating topic, because everything at P&G's in is very deliberate. Every category we're in leverages a core part of our expertise, of our innovation, of our technologies. And a lot of that is sharing insights cross category and cross brands. When you are a company of brands, it becomes really, really important that everybody knows what everyone else is working on, because you never know when a A business model, a manufacturing strategy, a new technology, a new chemistry or molecule, a new package invention, a new dispensing technology. It could impact one of the other categories. And so we have actually a display in the museum, you may remember, it was called the connections chart, which is basically how all of our brands are interconnected. And it's this great spider web of all of our brands and how one led to the other, and that one led to this one, and this one led to that one, kind of thing. And so we call those technology platforms. Technology platforms when we develop a technology or a science or something that basically can be used across multiple categories. The first big technology platform that we had invented was, or leveraged, was pig fats. Because who knew that pig fats could light your house, clean your body, and clean your clothes? Because we basically created candles, body soaps, and laundry soaps off that same raw material understanding. So that kind of started things off. But heavy duty detergent science, so Tide again, was one of the biggest ones. And that science cleaned so well that our scientists back then said, what else could we clean with it? And someone said, how about hair? So we then created a brand that would eventually become Head and Shoulders based off of that Tide science. And then Head and Shoulders did so well, we then decided to move more deliberately into beauty care. And then through both invention and some acquisition, we then filled that portfolio. Our scientists then said, wow, what else could we clean with this Tide science? And someone said, well, how about teeth? So we then created a brand called Crest with the inspiration behind that Tide science. And Crest did so well, we said, wow, healthcare, another area that we should be in. So through both invention and acquisition, we also filled that particular part of our portfolio. What else could we clean with it? Someone said, well, how about dishes and floors? So we created a brand called Mr. Clean, Dawn, and Cascade with the inspiration behind that Tide science, which led us into our home care portfolio. And we have a very incredible philanthropy called P&G Purifier Sachets, which is part of our Children's Safe Drinking Water philanthropy, which is these little powder sachets that clean polluted water, and it makes pathogen or polluted water drinkable. It's an amazing demo. I highly encourage people to go to the website and look at how it works. It's csdw.com. And anyway, you can see the demo of how it works. And just celebrated actually an anniversary. But that science is also inspired by Tide science that makes that work. So, again, none of those things are the same chemistry, but they're inspired by the science. So, who knew that Tide science could help your clothes be stain free, could help your hair be dandruff free, your teeth be cavity free, your surfaces germ free, your dishes spot free, your water pathogen free. I mean, it's amazing what a science of inspiration can do in different categories. So we're always looking for those technology platforms, and a lot of our brands are linked by those.
Yeah, and I think I caught one of the images I was looking back at the tour was that how did diapers lead to the Swiffer?
Right. Yeah. So it was diapers and even always pads, both actually. Yeah. So we are very good at creating thin non-wovens that are highly absorbent. And so when the Swiffer team, which started with an insight of they were at a consumer's house and she was mopping, and she basically told them, you know what, all the mopping liquids really do a good job. What I need help with is getting rid of all the stuff that I mop with. I've got 2 different kinds of mops. I've got a bucket I got to carry around. I've got little scrubbers for corners and then the grout. And her statement was basically, if you want to clean up something for me, clean up my closet. So we wanted to then start to work on what we would call an all-in-one mopping solution, which everyone in the audience would know was Swiffer Wet Jet, essentially. But when we realized one of the things we needed to make that work was a thin non-woven that was highly absorbent, the Swiffer team absolutely went and talked to our Always team into the Pampers team and said, okay, how would we do this? And we even have an original prototype of the Swiffer Wet Jet sitting in the museum, which was literally a broomstick with an upside down Mr. Clean bottle with this tube kind of going down to the broom head, where they took an Always pad and duct taped it basically to the broom head to just kind of prototype the idea. But we know they also used Pampers diapers for some of those prototypes too, to basically test out the idea. So sharing technology insights again.
So we've been through some of the innovations that worked over time and have
Mhm.
become huge successes for the company going back decades. Of course, some of the innovations or attempts have not quite worked out. Any particular examples that come to mind, and what lessons did they teach the company about development, consumer habits,
Sure.
marketing issues? I imagine all of the above.
Yeah, yeah. So we actually have an exhibit. It's one of our most popular in the museum. I will tell you, people come in almost every day to look at and explore it, and we call it the innovate, stumble, and repeat wall. And it's all about how failure is critical to innovation, basically. Because if you're not failing, you're not innovating, because that means you're not trying anything new and different, right? And if you think about any major invention that we've all, in our lifetimes have seen happen, there's always stories of that. Again, tenacity, perseverance, learning from failed, prototypes, early versions that didn't work, but how that inspired future versions that did. And we collect those as well. And a couple that come to mind. So Tide Pods, which is a huge success, is one of a massive platform in fabric care, for example, and a huge innovation in laundry. A lot of people know that if I ask them when did it launch, they'd say, "Oh, it didn't launch that long ago. It launched in 2012," and they'd be right. The current version of Tide Pods did launch, in fact, in 2012. But we actually first launched unit dose Tide back in 1960, and then there was several attempts between 1960 and 2012 that all tried to keep doing it. We knew there was something there, and each of them failed for different reasons. Sometimes the technology just wasn't ready yet. Sometimes the consumer habit wasn't ready yet. Sometimes the appliances weren't ready yet. They just weren't ready. But every time that we would talk it with consumers, there was always something there. So the key in a failure is understanding why it fails. And you want to make sure that if the insight is good, you don't want to lose the insight. And then you just work on how to fix the part that didn't work. And we eventually, of course, got through that. But 52 years basically between the first unit dose and the launch of Tide Pods, of failed attempts to get to that insight and that learning to then change the category.
I feel like NASA got to the moon quicker than that.
I know. Yeah, it's interesting. Another great one is we have a fantastic product out called Dawn Power Wash, which is spray dish soap, and we actually, believe it or not, first launched that in 1991. And it was a product called Dawn Sure Shot, and then we launched another version of that in 2003, and then the one that most people listening know launched in 2020. And absolutely, we now have a much better formula, a much better package, a much better in-use experience than what that 90s version did. But honestly, one of the biggest things that changed was consumer habit, because people wanted to do what they called clean as I go. They didn't necessarily want to wait till the sink was completely full. They didn't want to, have the dishwasher half empty or whatever. They basically wanted to wash dishes as they made them. And so a sprayed dish soap actually then makes perfect sense. So sometimes, the thing with innovations is sometimes you just have to be patient with them. And again, you just don't want to lose the insight. And you still may, if you have to hold on to it, you may have to continue to evolve it, make it better, do different prototypes with it. But if the insight's good, you want to make sure there's a way to protect those, which is another thing that we do. And part of our role as the Heritage Center is to have a place where those great insights and ideas can sit, as future generations in the company come back to get inspired by them and say, yeah, gosh, if we took that and we combined it with this new technology that we've developed now, we combine it with this, that may work. And that's how innovation happens.
Another fascinating thing I remember seeing, Shane, was an Emmy Award in the museum. And I don't know that I ever put two and two together. And I used to work at CBS for a decade where we had soap operas on the air. And it actually turns out there's a new soap opera that you're involved with. But you guys literally put the soap in soap opera.
Very much, very much. Yeah, that Emmy that you saw was for our pioneering work in the development of the soap opera. And Advertising is also, one of our key skills and expertise areas. And we always want to be where our consumers are, talking to them about our brands and our products. And way back in the 20s, this brand new thing launched called the radio. And people were just amazed with this. I mean, stuff was coming across the airwaves now, not just reading it in the newspaper or something. It was coming across the airwaves. And so people immediately were trying to figure out what to put on this thing, throughout the day. And of course, something entertaining made perfect sense. But a lot of the early radio shows, they were more instructional. And they would be short instructional, segments of things. And consumers basically quickly came back and said, actually, we don't want instruction. We actually want entertainment. Yes, give us entertainment. Give us dramas, give us action, give us things like that, and give us things that continue week on week so that we can continue to follow them. And so, we had gotten involved. A lot of the early instructional shows we were also part of. They were sponsored by Crisco, which was a brand that we used to own and that we also had created back and launched in 1911. And there was Crisco kind of cooking minutes, they were called, or something to that effect. And it was basically little instructional things. But again, consumers said, no instruction.
The videos today you would watch on like TikTok or YouTube. I mean, you guys were doing that on the radio 100 years ago.
That's right, for sure. Yeah. But then consumers wanted more entertainment, less instruction. So we went to work on that and did research again with consumers. And they wanted romantic dramas, which we basically created. And they were these operatic little, short stories that were on the radio. And there was big soap company that was doing a lot of advertising during them. And so the words soap opera start to get kind of put together. And we for sure were one of the pioneering companies behind that. And you're right. We have a new one called Beyond the Gates that's getting ready to launch. And it's basically a soap opera set in an affluent Maryland suburb. Essentially, but that's coming out very soon.
An affluent fill in the blank soap opera. So similar to candle making, you guys are back in the soap opera business.
Yes, and people know some of our famous ones like the Guiding Light, which of course was around from a long time, both from radio and through TV. But yes, it's really fun to be back into that again.
Yeah, and you guys had As the World Turns too, right?
Yes, yeah. There was actually over our history there was 12 different soap operas that we were involved in and that we helped lead.
So Shane, it's interesting as the historian here, you're also involved in the future. Because the people who are building these future products, are relying on the past. What have you learned about? As you've looked back and as you are working with folks across the company about consumer habits, the American consumer, frankly, the global consumer these days, what's changed? What's the same in terms of what they're looking for?
So there's three behaviors that we share a lot of insights and stories around when people come to visit, especially the teams that are working on future initiatives and future projects. The first is that there's a great principle that creation always requires influence. And that, in some form, all the ideas are out there. It's making creative connections basically becomes key. Somebody sees this insight and that technology and this idea and and they mash those together and create something new. So when they come in, we try to expose them to other examples of where we've done that, like, taking Mr. Clean insights and combining those with always, pad insights and a consumer need around mopping and mashing those together and creating Swiffer Wet Jet. So creation always requiring influence is an important one. A second one is what we call constructive disruption, which is being bold, but taking smart risks and being willing to disrupt yourself. So as soon as you develop a new technology or innovation, basically, you start working on how we could do that even better, even if it means obsoleting that. So, for example, when we launched Tide in 1946, the first print ad for Tide said, Tide gets clothes cleaner than any soap made. And what people may not realize is that P&G owned the number 1 and number 2 soap brand in the United States at that time. We knew that synthetic detergents were superior to soap-based cleaning because of the problems I'd mentioned earlier. And so we had to be willing to let those go. It's what the consumers needed and wanted, and we will then, develop that technology. So you have to be willing to constructively disrupt yourself. And then the last one is unique insights, which is everything has to start with falling in love with the problem again. Consumer is boss. So everything needs to start with studying consumers. And because habits change, because new problems arise, that is why we still to this day do those in-homes that I talked about. We still do the shop alongs because you never know when something could shift. You never know. And as homes change, as needs change, as fabrics change, as habits change, as any of those things change, we have to be up to speed on that and see how that impacts our consumers. So we use those historic examples to show this isn't something new. We've been doing this since 1837. It's just things have changed throughout that time period, but the principles stay the same.
Shane, this has been a lot of fun. I appreciate you taking time.
Great pleasure. Great pleasure.
And look forward to chatting again in the future.
Fantastic. Thank you.
All right. I want to thank all of you again for listening. I want to thank Shane for joining us for that conversation. Fascinating. I love corporate histories, and we hope to be doing more of them in the near future. We want to thank the folks at Downey again for sponsoring this podcast and look forward to being back with more conversations. You can check out clips of this over on our Instagram page and look out for more on this podcast coming soon.